When the dog could walk, he could run with the best of them. When he was alive, we would get up every Sunday morning, park by the Long Center, jog past the field with the Kite Festival, hustle under the Mopac Bridge, past the boating docks, the gazebo and benches, and up to the footbridge that scrapes alongside Lamar. There, we would sit and watch the runners and bike riders zip past us as the sun came up. A boy on the bridge played the kazoo. He would watch the leaves sprout and the flowers bloom. It was a happy place for us. We would smile and marvel at the world passing by. When he got older, we didn't run. We waddled every Saturday morning across the bridge with graffiti on the support beam, down by the water with the ducks and geese, and finally laid down on the platform where joggers and cyclists would pass us by with a kung fu group in the shadow of the rising sun as the leaves turned brown. The dog would have a smile on his face and wonder in his eye. When the dog got even older, he could no longer move his hips. On Saturday mornings, I would put him in our truck, smothered in bumper stickers, and drive along the lake the best we could, looking out the window to all the runners and the passerbys, and all the brown leaves on the ground. By then, his eyes were speckled and gray, but he could still smile and greet the morning sun. It was a happy time for us. When the dog died, the funeral home gave me flower seeds glued together in the shape of a heart. I went to the trail with friends and family on a Saturday morning with kazoos, planted the seeds in a strip of grass by Zach Scott Theater, and gave the dog a 21 kazoo salute. "To Dusty!" I yelled. I'm getting the longitude and latitude of the planted seeds tattooed to my arm this season. The trail was a happy place for me and the dog.
wonderful video.
Thank you. All right. Welcome and thank you for coming to the Common Waters workshop. Before we dive into our nitty gritty and our workshop, we want to have a blessing by Daniel Llanes. Daniel?
Thank you. If we were all live, we would get in a circle and we would do a traditional red path blessing. And so, since we are in cyberspace, and I've been asked to do this a few times, I've gotten a handle on how to do it through the internet. So, this blessing, just so some of you I don't know, I'm Daniel Llanes. I'm a Chicano here in Austin, Texas. Coahuilteca, Azteca Mexica heritage, and so this blessing is based on that cosmology. Is that okay with everyone?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So because we are in cyberspace, I'm going to ask you uh, to turn off your keep your audio on. Everyone should turn their audio on and turn off your video and close your eyes. And you will hear me as we go. And then at the appropriate moment, I will ask you all to turn your cameras back on. Okay, so just take a moment, take a nice deep breath, couple of breaths. Imagine, visualize, and feel your breath, the gift of life by the Creator. Feel the breath that we all breathe, 7 generations before us, 7 generations ahead of us. Breathe today with us. If you would, and if you could, place your hands together, fingertips touching. Take a breath, feel, imagine, visualize, and feel the earth breathing. You are air, the gift of the Creator, the gift of breath. Imagine, visualize, and feel the earth as water, the water of the earth, the water that is 7 generations before and 7 generations ahead. As you feel your hands and breathe, imagine, visualize, and feel the water that you are. Imagine, visualize, and feel the earth, the mountains, the valleys, the rivers, the deserts, the rocks. As you breathe, feel your fingertips, feel your hands. You are earth. We are earth. As you breathe, breathe as earth. Imagine, visualize, and feel light, the fire, the spirit that animates us. As you breathe, imagine, visualize, and feel the light that the Creator has gifted us. The light within us, the light amongst us. Imagine, visualize, and feel the center within you, As you breathe, imagine and visualize. Feel the breath filling you from the center outward, bringing in the life force. As you breathe, imagine, visualize, and feel the center amongst us all. As you breathe, I breathe. As you feel, I feel. We are all one, the leaves of the tree of life, with our brothers and sisters of all the realms. We're grateful for this day. We're grateful for our health and safety and well-being. So be it. So it is. It is done. Now put your cameras back on and see everybody's smiling face. Was that okay?
That was
great.
amazing.
Lovely.
Thank you, Daniel.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, that was beautiful, Danielle. Thank you so much for being here and doing that. Hello, everyone. My name is Charlotte Tonser, and I am the Capital Projects Director for the Trail Foundation. And I want to welcome you to this workshop today. The Trail Foundation is just thrilled to have everyone, participants and speakers and our team here at this workshop. And we are so excited for this arts and culture plan, and then moreover, really the involvement we're having with the community right now. Let me tell you just a little bit about TTF, and then I'll tell you about the project, and then Common Waters, and then we'll keep going. The Trail Foundation, we are the stewards of the 10-mile Ann and Roy Butler Trail along Ladybird Lake. The organization started in 2003, but also this year we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of the trail itself, which is a really exciting milestone for us and for everyone in Austin. Our Trail Foundation mission is to protect, enhance, and connect the Butler Trail for the benefit of all. We're a nonprofit who works alongside our city partners to improve the trail and the park spaces and the natural areas, you know, all the reasons that all of us love the trail and the lake so much. So about the project, the Arts and Culture Project, it's important for so many reasons. It is not news to anyone here that Austin is growing. And I didn't know if you knew the trail saw 4.9 million visits last year, 4.9 million visits to the trail, which is amazing. The trail is lovingly referred to as the heart or the jewel of downtown Austin. And we really see arts and culture activities that we're working on in this plan to contribute to the space and elevating the experience of everyone who uses it and supporting the natural environment and representing the character and diversity of Austin, increasing the diversity of trail users. And we are just so excited to be partnering also with the Parks and Rec Department here and the Austin Art in Public Places for the plan. So we've been spending some months listening, learning, and we're so excited to learn from everyone here today. There's still so much more for TTF to learn from our community, our partners, the histories of Austin and our communities, and the views that everyone's looking towards the future. So it's really conversations like these today that are going to impact our plan and as it reflects the people living here. So the Common Waters Project, we see this project not just as a community build and engagement event, but really a way to navigate a new process of bringing arts, culture, and ecology together to lay the groundwork for the arts and culture plan. So we're envisioning one or more floating wetlands on Ladybird Lake. And our artist team, which I'm so excited that you are about to meet in just a minute or so, will be working through the idea and design for what those are. So I can't lay out a performa for you or what that's actually going to look like because we're working through that. But just know, as anything in Austin, if you've been here for about 5 minutes or 50 years, we're still working through the permissions part of the project, and the artists are going to help us with those challenges and help us find the answers. So we're very excited about that. And one of the reasons we really selected this team, which is the Todd W. Bressy team, was the inclusion of an environmental artist. And this artist is someone whose work is based in nature and its processes and whose art tells the ecological story to the users. As I mentioned before, we all know the trail is a place set in nature, and it was really critical for our team to understand that and reflect it in the plan. So we're thrilled to have Stacy Levy, the environmental artist, here as part of the team. So with that, I'm going to pass it over and introduce you to Stacy Levy.
Hi, Charlotte. Thank you. Thank you so much, Charlotte. And we really are so excited to be working with these amazing artists who are now part of the team, working on this collaborative project for the trail and for the lake. And the project's all about connecting culture and ecology and art in new ways. And it's as much, as Charlotte said, it's much about being a process and building a process as it is about creating a product. And we're going to be finding all sorts of new angles of connection to the trail, to the neighborhood, and to the lake. And I want to take a moment to introduce myself and then introduce the other artists. I am an eco artist. I make permanent and temporary pieces. Many of my pieces are about water, and many of them are looking for collaborative solutions to commonplace ecological issues, as well as telling the story of the site and the history of the site. And so that's where I'm coming from. I find the lake wonderful. I find the fact that people are living on this edge of nature such a great and important thing about this park. So I think I'm going to introduce, can we start up with Reggie's slides? Yeah. Reggie Thomas is a brilliant maker of art, a connector of culture, and a creator of community. Her acclaimed artwork is widely held in many collections around the world. Her clients range from Ann Richards, the Democratic National Convention, the Human Rights Commission, to the Queen of England. She ignited the East Side art scene with her Pine Street Station studios, and Reggie's thought-provoking exhibit Ascension was shown recently at the George Washington Carver Museum in Austin, October 2017 to Feb 2018. And I hope Reggie will speak a little bit about her work right now.
And she's actually, I don't think she could make it. So
Okay. Well, that we will all be meeting again and hearing more from her, and then seeing what our collaboration comes up with. So getting to know her work will be an interesting part of thing. Ruben Esquivel is a creative maker and artist. He's of Mexican, Spanish, and Native American descent, the 5th generation of his family living in Austin. Ruben paints joyous and complex large-scale murals and intriguing architectural sites, from highway support columns for the Austin Parks Foundation Pillar Project to stairways and public spaces in the South First community, deftly drawing from many artistic modes to make his own very evocative style. Ruben founded East End Eclectic in 2021, creative agency that serves artists through management services and consulting. Ruben, will you speak a little bit about your work?
Yes, nice to meet everybody. It's great to be here. So my work, I'm a new artist. Actually, I've only been creating my own work for about 2 years, but been doing creative work, managing artists and supporting artists, helping them do their work for about 10 years. And 2 years ago, I was like, why am I not doing this myself? So I started creating artwork and got a great response. The picture you see here is from the Pillar Project that I did with Eastlink, and it is portraits of my Uncle Gilbert and grandparents and his wife, Jane. Super special piece, of course, because I got to paint my great-grandparents and uncle and aunt on the pillar, and this is a piece that'll be here, you know, for generations to come, probably longer than I'll be around. So it's super special, and even more special that I got to paint it. Yeah, this is one of my favorites for sure. This is a piece that was done for the Hope Outdoor Gallery. And the concept behind this project was that they are going to build a wall built of these bricks that artists from all over the city created. And the bricks were made from Austin earth, which I think is special too. I'm from the East Side, have lived in the East Side my whole life. My family's been here for many generations, so it's a very special place to me. And of course, my Mexican heritage is shown on that piece. This piece is for, I did for during the Black Lives Matter movement for a campaign called the Black Legacy Project that me and my business partner Zuzu put together and raised money for 3 Black-owned nonprofits in the city. This is a 3D backlit piece that I did for a client, private client of Amy Winehouse, one of my favorites. Really excited to explore, you know, doing 3D renderings and creating something and watching it come to life with this project. So looking forward to it.
Great. And Taylor Davis is the third of this our group. She's a landscape architect, an artist and curator. She's passionate about the intersection of landscape and public art, something close to my heart too. Her work explores how natural and urban environments can be intertwined. She's investigated cultural preservation and land stewardship in the historic Dallas Freedom Community and the possibilities of carbon sequestration in urban landscapes. Recently, she curated the show Exotify Elsewhere with Grace Sanabria, dealing with the oppression and exclusion of the culture and bodies of women of color. And Taylor, will you speak a little bit more about your work, please? It'd be great.
Yes, thank you, Stacy. Hi, everyone. My name is Taylor. I am a landscape architect and curator here in Austin. So this first project was actually a competition through ULI Hines, which is a land planning organization. And in this project, we were sort of tasked with developing a section in Miami, Florida, based on the new light rail system that was coming through there. So in this project, we looked at the Windward Art District in Miami, and we looked at a lot of this sort of warehouses around the area that are covered in public art. And so our thought process was, how do we sort of preserve that cultural legacy while still providing spaces for a new economy or a new economic development that was really focused on affordable housing and artistic communities. And so by keeping the walls that made up these buildings in Wynwood, we sort of created a series of public spaces that were defined by those walls, and also started to introduce a new plant community that would create serene, sort of compact refuges and a place for refuge in a growing metropolitan city. And Exotify Elsewhere is a curatorial collaboration that I started with my friend Grace in San Francisco in 2016. As she was a practicing artist and I'm just sort of a lover of art, we didn't see ourselves and our experiences reflected in the art that we were seeing around San Francisco. And more importantly, we weren't seeing Black women and women of color talk about this art and sort of contextualize it under critical thought. And so our practice is focused on promoting and amplifying women of color. We've had 3 shows. This was our second show in San Francisco. We had 14 amazing artists that collaborated with us at the Swim Gallery, which is affiliated with also the Luggage Store Gallery in San Francisco. And this project is actually some student work that I did when I first started my master's at UT. I graduated just recently. And this was a conceptual idea to bring to life an old water plant in New Braunfels, Texas, right along the headwaters of the Comal River. And so we were tasked with creating a community space to give back to the community of New Braunfels. And this would have research plots, educational gardens, similar to what you would find at a botanical garden or an arboretum. And really thinking about the movement of stormwater through this space and how to maximize the use of that water as it moves through.
All right, that's great. And Meredith, will you introduce our next segment?
Yes, absolutely. Happy to. I'm so excited about this. And we're going to step into working with or presenting artists that have been commissioned for projects along the trail, or were allowed to do projects along the trail. And our first artist is Beili Liu. she created a project that was so monumental. It changed the way that I think I dreamed about what could happen in the water and along the trail. Beili Liu is a visual artist who creates material and process-driven, site-responsive installations, working with commonplace materials and the elements such as thread, needle, scissors, feather, salt, wax, and cement, and trees, dead trees. Liu manipulates their intrinsic qualities to extrapolate complex cultural narratives. And I think some of the things that are really important about her work is that, when we worked with the community in front of this, that actually was the foundation for creating Common Waters, there were 3 themes that kind of arose as really important to the communities along the trail. That was cultural preservation, climate change, and environmental activism, which is why you see the sessions the way they are. And, I think one of the things that she, in her response to the ask to participate, was this: the 3 themes, cultural preservation, climate change, and environmental activism, are timely and important topics for all of us. The arts can contribute to these conversations in transformative ways. And I think that's a true understanding of her work and what artists can do in terms of really helping to address the importance of the community themes. So Beili Liu was also awarded the Pollock Prize for Creativity in 2022. In 2021 and 2022, Beili Liu was named the Fulbright Arctic Chair. So she's working out of Norway, and I'm just super excited. I'm going to turn it over to you, Beili, and so that you can do your presentation.
Thank you so much, Meredith, and thank you everyone for being here and inviting me to participate in this really meaningful conversation. I'm going to start share my screen. Can you guys see my PowerPoint? Okay, let me start the show. Can you all see the first slide? Okay. So I am very excited to share the Thirst Project with everyone. And I think with the context of the workshop, it might be really fun just to see as many images as possible. So I have the PowerPoint auto playing, and I'm just going to talk as it plays. I collected all these images to show the process. And the first thing I want to mention is that Thirst is a collaborative project. It's not my own. It's a collaboration between Women Their Work Gallery that actually commissioned the project, and they oversaw so much of the project. And our team is myself as the visual artist, 2 architects, Emily Little, Norma Yancey, and the landscape architect, Cassie Bergstrom. I mentioned this is so important because this is not a project of one person's work. It's a team project. Without these collaborative partners, it would not have been possible. As you can see, there are so many people that contributed their work, their labor, their thoughts, their creativity, from structural engineer to the tree team and to the painting team. And also volunteers helped us to do so many things along the process of the project. So we cited the center of Lady Bird Lake for this project because we have the privilege to have this constant water level lake in the center of Austin. So during the 2011 multi-year drought, we lost over 300 million trees. When our team started to talk about the pressing topic of water as this urgent environmental problem that's globally pressing, not just in Austin. So during my research, I learned the tremendous loss of trees, and it was such a surprise because as a citizen of Austin, I wasn't even quite aware that this was happening. So thinking about the site of the lake, this green belt that we walk and run and take our strollers and our dogs to, that has an image that almost numbs and disguises the urgency. So that made the site perfect to place this drought-killed tree. We painted it ghostly white, referring to the loss. The singular tree, it is a native Texas cedar elm, it's very common, that was killed by drought, embodies this loss that's unfathomable, and it's not something we could easily understand. And in this way, I do think as artists, it is our responsibility to bear witness of our time and to share a message of truth through our creativity. So I think thirst really embodied this desire to bring attention, to tell the story in a way that's visual, that's impactful, that inspires conversation in our community. So it took us 18 months from the conception of the idea all the way to the completion of the project. There are so many steps, and it's obviously very, and there are many challenges as well. So my presentation is stopping. Is it stopping?
Which phone number for Dominic account house?
Can you guys hear me? I'm
Yeah.
gonna stop share for a second. Did my presentation stop?
We can still hear you. It just wavered for a minute.
Yeah, it just wavered. We could hear it.
Phone number for Dominic account house.
Oh no.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
I think maybe we have a connection issue. Did my presentation stop?
Yes, it did.
Okay. So I'm gonna try to play it again. I hope it continues.
I thought.
My computer is acting up, so I'm going to advance it manually.
Okay.
Looks like we're back on track.
Okay.
So
We can't see it.
You want to try to share screen again?
okay. Please excuse me. Can you see this?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, there's something mixing up on my computer, but here we go. We're back on track. So one of the most important and exciting part is transporting the tree from the ranch down Lady Bird Lake all the way to the site. And you cannot see the structure from looking at the tree straight on. So there's actually a post that's driven 20 feet into the bedrock of the lake. We took a permit out, and the tree in fact has a address. In order to get a permit, you have to have an address. So Emily Little really took this very complex process of obtaining a permit, getting approval. I don't know how many meetings exactly and presentations that the entire team presented. So I think it's somewhere between 45 to 60 meetings. So we've been to many different entities to present this idea. And it was such a unusual thought. And there's a lot of concerns about safety and so on. So I just want to pause here for a second. It is really amazing that we eventually got the support from everyone who was involved with the project, and the tree was installed and it was on display for 3 months. And during this time, we had 185,000 people that saw the work. So this led me to talk about the second component of the project, which is the prayer flag. There are 2.5 miles of prayer flags that's strung along the path of the Lady Bird Lake. So the idea is if you start walking from the tree and following the path, the prayer flag will lead you back to where the tree is. It borrows the tradition of Tibetan prayer flag, and the idea of these flags, they're strung in landscapes. As wind sends the flags fluttering into the air, it sends prayers to both of the people and the landscape. That's where the prayer flag is located. So you see at Fluger Circle, we designed a really complex pattern. Cassie Bergstrom took this part on, and I thought she did such a beautiful job. And it captures the light throughout different time of the day. And it become the centers, like this energy vortex when people walk around and going along the Fluger Circle, they get to see this installation from both below and above. So you can see school children walking around here, looking at the flag. One interesting thing I do want to share is that the image of the tree actually came before we found the tree itself. So that echoes almost worked out perfectly. And interestingly, during the time of thirst being on view, this particular area was flooded twice, in fact, and in the end, the tree still stood. Many people in our community said that it is as if this prayer was answered because the rain did come. However, the water crisis, it's still ongoing. It is still something this conversation need to continue. Each and every one of us need to look at what is happening. So I want to talk a little bit about extension of the prayer flags. So Women in Work generously gifted me all the leftover remaining prayer flags. And I saved it in my studio for about, 7 years. And in 2020, when the pandemic came to our community, the idea of making masks came to me. As you recall at the beginning, you can't really buy masks anywhere. So I decided to sew 1,000 prayer masks, and send them out to the community. So this prayer for our community, for the well-being of people in our community is ongoing. So this is a recent kind of extension of the Thirst Project. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. And I know we have a little 1-minute video, I think 1.5 minutes, that we want to show you, where you can hear a little bit about the trees, the loss of trees during the drought, and listen to someone else other than me.
Very beautiful, very beautiful.
Thank you. I don't hear sound.
Yeah, I don't either.
Thank you. Just a second.
And this is Charlotte again with the Trail Foundation. Just a reminder that the Q&A is open. You can submit your questions, and after each session, we will read those off if we have time and answer those. So please go ahead and submit your questions. Thank you.
$8.7 billion in economic losses in the year 2011 from the drought. That's mostly due to agricultural losses and livestock losses. But what that doesn't account for is that there were actually also 301 million trees killed as a result of the drought. What's not figured into the economic equation there is what value do we place on 301 million trees? No matter what value you put on a tree, it adds up to quite a bit. And probably those kinds of losses are as significant or greater than what we've suffered from the livestock and agricultural losses. Trees are important. They sequester carbon out of the atmosphere. They provide shade for us. They allow water to more effectively infiltrate into the ground if it's happening with shade. They keep soil from eroding. The soil and the trees and the surrounding vegetation all help naturally filter that water to improve water quality. There's so many services that trees provide to us. We should be trying to replace and have as many trees as we can.
Wonderful. I want to mention that there is a 30-minute PBS documentary, Arts in Context. So Meredith, I don't know if you have the link, maybe we can share that with people. It's a little bit long to share here, but I really appreciated this thought of if you just put $1 to one tree, that's $300 million. But obviously the trees were so much more. That was such a relevant point to make, and every tree counts.
Thank you, Beili. Does anybody have any questions about the project? The artist in terms of, what the dynamics were of making this happen? Does anybody have any questions?
Hi, Beili. I would love to know sort of who were the extraneous stakeholders and project collaborators that you needed. If I know we're thinking about permitting, but like when you think about like who did you have to call to move the tree, and like when did you decide that or however you were going to transport it, just some of those really small details that kind of come with doing a project of that magnitude.
Sure. It's been some years. I'll try to remember the details and some of the things that really stood out. The first thing was we did need to get the Austin Park and Trail Foundation to get on board. And we did also need to get the Art in Public Place on board. So those are the places we presented the idea, and then we need to talk to the city and many different departments of the city, and also the community, the people who live near the area. Just like any other public art project, you want to talk with stakeholders within the community to see if they are interested and support the idea. And I want to say at the beginning of the project, the response were very mixed, because this is not a project that's backed by, Art in Public Places, for example. It's not a Trail Foundation project. So Women Their Work received invitation from Robert Rauschenberg Foundation to invite artists together to create a collaborative piece. And there's a grant that supported the project. So that's kind of the call, and this is the response. So coming from a private foundation and a nonprofit organization, which is an amazing art gallery, we started from just a very low place and slowly knocking on all the doors. And there were many times we weren't sure if the project can be approved. Imagine as an individual artist, I think ideas is one thing, but to take the idea to the finished point, it takes so many different steps. In our one also interesting memory that I have, when we first started sitting down to talk about water and how to respond to water, I brought to the team, I say, in my research, I read about all the trees that's dying, and our streets and our downtown is green. What if we work with the trees? And I said, I had this crazy idea. How about we have a ghost tree in the center of the lake? And I said, don't take me seriously. I know it's not doable. I think it will be way too expensive. It will be too difficult and too dangerous. We're not going to get permission. So I'm just sharing this just for fun, for discussion. And I remember Emily Little was like, hang on, let's talk about it. And this is what I mean by, as an artist, you can dream up these ideas, and sometimes we literally just discard it thinking there's no way we can do this. But the collaborative team was the reason that this idea was pushed forward and encouraged. And in the end, it's this project of a lifetime, as I believe all of us believe that it's the case. If it were for me, I'd be like, okay, I got this crazy idea. Now let's move on to talk about something realistic. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, it did. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. I mean, there are so many different moments. Maybe just one more. When we start looking for the tree, we couldn't take any tree within the city of Austin. So that's a detail that probably not many people know. We looked at many different trees, and we were recommended to take invasive trees, right? It's really good to take them out so we don't have to look for a good tree. But I'm like, conceptually, we want this tree to be pulling the heartstring of our citizens. It needs to be something that we love, and now we've lost it. So we're looking for a drought-killed tree that's native. And within the city of Austin, we couldn't get approval. So this tree was identified on a private ranch just outside of the city limit. So that's really interesting. I went through many different venues and many months to realize we literally cannot take a tree in Austin, even if it's a dead tree. So
Thank you.
Yeah.
yeah.
Anything else? Going once, going twice.
Well, I just think that's so Austin. Permits.
Yeah.
Congratulations for getting through it.
Yeah.
Yes, and thank you for that. And it's both. There are these difficulties and bureaucracy and challenges, but in the end, all the parties came on board and supported the project, and that's why it was done. I think it took time for people to starting to believe in the project and to gain the momentum. And at the end, then everyone's on board and helping. I mean, I think the project took so much more than the grant was able to support. And Women That Work did an amazing job raising funds for this project that's obviously not commercially driven. It's about sharing this vision and this image, this story that everyone remembers, and hopefully we carry with us. And it's a constant reminder, what can we do to save our trees, to think about this changing world? Yeah.
Beili, thank you so much. I appreciate you making time and space and from Norway and sharing the dynamics of the Thirst Project. And I'm just grateful for you to share the project with us.
And thank you for having me. I'm here representing the team, and the reason I'm here in Norway is also to look at the environment and how it's changing and how do we talk about it. So thank you again for having me, and yes, take good care.
Yep, we will. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yep. The next artist, architect that we're going to hear from is David Goujon. He is an architect and an artist with an interest in symbolism and landscapes. He's the owner of Land and Design and serves on a number of local community and professional boards. He enjoys spending time on rivers with his wife and 2 daughters. He's also served on the Brain Trust for months and months to help sort of shape this project and you know, how we are strategic in bringing the community to the table and making sure that they are present. So the project, he's going to present his creative destruction.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, again, thank you, everybody. Hopefully everybody can hear me just fine. Appreciate being invited here to share the Las Piñatas project, which was completed back in 2015. So you can probably go to the next slide. Thank you. Yeah, so for those that can remember, we used to have piñata stores lining Cesar Chavez on the east side. These numbers of piñata stores, of course, have been dwindling almost down to just a couple now. Well, back in 2014 to 2015, there was the Humpalin Piñata store that was demolished in this very bizarre, very offensive manner by the owner of the property. They had sold the property to another investor, and they demolished the building with very little notice to the tenants that were renting it. The store itself was one that had been, it's very colorful, very visible on Cesar Chavez. And to me, it was really interesting kind of just reading it from in the papers and just like learning about everything that was happening. Just what the piñata symbolizes as something that's, festive and something that you destroy. It's often a hero or the 7 pecados, the 7 deadly sins, or in my art, it was a burro. But really what had really inspired me to do something was the opportunity to work with the Tempo project. It was something I actually just read in the paper. I said, hey, here's an opportunity for me to be able to do something and, you know, kind of respond to this in a positive way, in a creative way. And so I think we can go to the next slide. Thanks. And so just looking at the symbol of a piñata as this kind of hero at times, you know, funny enough, I had just bought, I think, a Spider-Man piñata from that same store a month before it was demolished. And for me, it was this idea of, well, if the piñata was, you know, torn down, how can it rise again? And so you can go to the next slide. What I ended up doing was looking at the burro, and I was like, I'm just going to make it as big as I possibly can. Again, I got accepted through the Tempo Arts program from the city of Austin. And they were able to fund this, and this process just kind of really created this this deep desire for me to be able to connect with not just the family that was affected by this, but the community that is continually affected by this destruction of their landmarks. And the burro, like standing as tall as it could, I designed it would be 10 feet tall, enormous, about 8 feet long, and 4 feet wide, just big enough to fit in the back of a U-Haul trailer. But I wanted them to be as strong as I could for this installation. Go to the next slide, please. And so my background in architecture, I have a fascination as well with parametric design, which is a computer-aided form of creating form. And so with some of the tools that I have learned, I just kind of molded this this plywood structure that I could replicate. In the event of this project, I was able to replicate it 3 times and build it similarly like I would a building, right? I wrapped it with home wrap, and actually the colorful parts of the piñatas, I flew down to Mexico City to buy the jump house plastic, you know, so the jump house at the Cumpolin that you could rent from them. And with that, I was able to bring it back and cut it up and have something that could actually endure the elements. And in looking for a place to locate them, Tempo had a couple parks at the time that they were offering. And in Festival Beach, Oscar Rendon Park was really an amazing opportunity with its proximity to the water, because it's kind of standing tall, rising from the water. I felt just kind of coming out of it and protecting it. You know, for me, it always felt like this strong symbol that they're just here, kind of almost grazing on the grass. And even there were, you know, I built them strong enough to, at one point, they were vandalized at night. There was I believe probably just some, you know, teenagers or something, but there were beer cans, and some people had to use cars to knock them down. And so I had to ask for additional funds, and we actually moved them to another place in the park. But they were perfectly fine. I was able to pick them up with a forklift and put them into their new spot. They were built strong. And so that kind of that symbol that I was trying to, you know, really just emphasize within this piece, kind of I had to like live firsthand, right? Like someone tried to destroy my piñatas. In the community and how they came back to me, really, and how like the same people I was trying to help came back and helped me, was just a very touching and beautiful moment for me as an artist and as an architect and as just a community advocate. Really, it was just something that took this to this bigger, I think, conversation I started having with myself on, well, what more can I do with these? And so if you go to the next slide, what I ended up thinking of was, well, let me raise some money. Let me create a program or some event that I can show my appreciation kind of back. And so I did a crowdfunding. I feel like this is almost the beginning of where crowdfunding was getting started. But I was able to raise enough money to be able to buy as many of the salvage piñatas from the Cumpolin store as I could. I think actually I bought all of them. And then I just littered them around the park, and I had a free piñata festival. So anybody could come, grab a piñata, string it up on a tree, and kind of have a piñata party. And what was really beautiful to me is I would come, you know, for the life of this installation, I'd go and kind of tend to my piñatas, you know, some people climbing on it and stuff would rip some of the pieces off, the colorful pieces, and I'd have to go and fix it. And oftentimes I would see families here, you know, Hispanic families that I could tell were just immigrants here, didn't know you know, much of the community that we know so well. And one story, a man came up to me and was like, "Hey, this is amazing. I love them." And I was like, "Well, do your kids like piñatas?" And they have kids. And they're like, "Yeah, but we can afford one. Actually, it's the little one's birthday next week." And just coincidentally, that was the same weekend that we're going to have this piñata festival. And so I told him to tell his daughter that we're going to throw her a big party for her birthday. And they ended up coming, and we were able to give them piñatas, and it was just such an incredible moment. I think I do have one more slide here. Is the last one? Yeah, and so obviously that kind of like of a model I've brought over now to the Dia de los Muertos event at the Mexican American Cultural Center, and where I've now kind of donated this concept to a group of architects named Latinos in Architecture. And what they've done is they've been able to look for grants that support artists and architects in creating their version of piñatas. And so you can kind of see a Mobius strip on the left side, and these like hula hoop kind of contraptions, and then the you know, just different variations. But we still always buy piñatas from local stores to give away to the public to be able to be used. And so for me, it was kind of using art as a catalyst to just show support and create something to me that was hopefully lasting as long as we can, to be able to give back. So that is my presentation. Anybody has any questions?
Does anybody have any questions? No questions?
Where's that big piñata now?
I had to take them down. Because it was tempo. It's temporary in nature, so I had to be something I had to take down. So I put it all in the recycling, everything I could. Yeah, kind of lived up. You know, it was perfect. It was a piñata. It was used and abused, and it started in a loving way at the end. It was a true piñata.
David, I think it's so cool how it had that second life, that you made an object and then it spawned a whole sort of interconnectivity with people through miniature versions of the same thing. And that's a really great part about this kind of art making, that I think this is an exemplary project to show that. It's great to see. I'm really glad to hear the backstory. I didn't know all the details.
Yeah, and it was, of course, it always like takes a team. You know, as you can see in the photos of building it, I had to ask for help, and of course, these things are not, you know, very light. They ended up weighing about 500 pounds each.
Wow!
And so it definitely took a good team of people. But you know, what was really interesting is, like, I remember when the piñatas were on the kind of knocked down, and I got a call, and I went over there, and I was, you know, in tears seeing these on the floor. There was a friend that I had made just recently, and he was just, you know, taking a run down the path, and he saw me, and he just ended up coming over to me and, like, you know, just helping me get through that. And that was like one of the first moments that I started to feel that community come and support me when I was doing my best to try to support them. And so it was a really, really personal, like, really great moment, great project for me.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
Yes, thank you for sharing that, and just your own perspective on really this idea of cultural preservation and how necessary it is, and it, you know, needs to be intentional, and there needs to be commitment to that. So really grateful for you for doing that project, but then also sharing it and being, you know, open and about the emotional side of it, and just the beauty of your process. So thank you, David. I appreciate that. And we're gonna go to a break now for 5 minutes, and then we're gonna move into the cultural preservation session.
My name is Sarita Davis. I'm the chair of the City of Austin Human Rights Commission. As I sit here near Lady Bird Lake, I've been thinking about what it means to me and my community. When I first arrived in Austin as a student on scholarship at UT Austin, I had no home, so I would often sleep in my car near Town Lake, now Lady Bird Lake. Being near the water made me feel safe and gave me solace. When I think of Lady Bird Lake, I think of beauty, peace, and freedom. As the city has grown and the architecture around the lake evolves and changes, I'm inspired. The natural elegance of the lake is enhanced by the art and culture springing up around it, almost as if it's an extension. Over the years and through the numerous changes in Austin, I've found ways to remain close and live near her. She remains my inspiration. Walking and running on the pedestrian footpath around the lake allows me to steady my inner peace. When I'm near the lake, I feel I am grounded. I know I am blessed and privileged to have free access to an amazing body of water. I encourage you to spend time near the lake. I guarantee it will help you focus on your goals and plans for how you want to shape and impact your community.
All right, we want to welcome everybody else back from break. We'll give it a little bit of time. All right. I'm Miriam Connor. I am with Public City, and I've lived in Austin for 30 years and been cultural making in Austin for more than 15. So for this next session, I'm super, super honored to introduce our next panelists. They are leaders and mentors in cultural preservation, and they are Alberta Phillips, who is an independent Austin journalist and a member of the Travis County African American Cultural Heritage Commission. Susana Almanza, director of Poder and Culture Warrior. And Tanya Debos, founder of Preserving Communities of Color. Welcome, y'all. And
Thank you.
Welcome. So to kick us off, I'm just going to ask a general question, and this discussion, if you have questions for each other, if you want to bounce around, completely welcome. So how do you define cultural preservation, and why is it important in your work? Alberta?
So I think that we've seen from the presentations by the artists, living, breathing definition of cultural preservation. But I wanted to just expand on that because for me as a Black woman living in these United States, living in the state of Texas, living in Austin, the city of Austin, the not so progressive city of Austin, I want to qualify that as that it's about telling the full story. Cultural preservation is about telling the full story. Half the story has never been told. As my friends who have been toiling in this vineyard a long time, Susana Almanza, I see that Daniel Llanes is on here, as well as Tanya, who is on the panel. Tanya and Susana, both good friends and cultural warriors, are on this panel. So it's time to tell the full story. And I want to give an example about how late in the day it is. So the city of Austin, we finally have on the trail itself, a park named after an African-American, Boma Overton Sr. And when was this done? Not 10 years ago, not 15, not 20 years ago. And Boma has been deceased, the late Boma Overton, a great civil rights warrior, has been deceased for some time. It was done just this year, so we're late. I want to throw the ball to another cultural warrior who's been toiling in the vineyard, Susana Almanza, because she knows something about this topic from all of the struggles that she's been involved with. Susana.
Yes, thank you so much. And it's so good to be here with everybody and all the other culture warriors. But I look at the culture as the culture preservation as really the preservation of the different communities that help build Austin. And like Alberta said, for so long, people of color have been left out of that process, that we help build Austin and help make it what it is today. And I think that preservation also, it has to do with our customs, our traditions, and our beliefs, and how we use the open space and the parks. And being an Indigenous person from this continent, it also represents the balance between humanity and nature. That's in the widest scope that I see in the preservation.
And Miriam, I also wanted to ask Tanya, who is joining us by telephone from Selma, Alabama. She just crossed over the Edmund Pettus Bridge, something that I did, and I told her she was going to have a deep feeling that was coming down from our ancestors when she crossed over that bridge today. As John Lewis would say, you know, he lost a little blood on that bridge. And indeed, that is absolutely, and I would say to John, a little blood, a whole lot of blood, John. In fact, you almost died on that bridge. But Tanya is also someone who has been toiling in the vineyard and doing a lot of work around the country, and in particular Houston. Tanya, are you there to share with us what your definition is of cultural preservation?
She might be having issues with her audio connection.
Okay, and I just want to say one more thing about cultural preservation, because it plays on what Susana was saying about how, and it's how the story gets told, right? You know, recently it's become somewhat fashionable to tell the story, and many people on this panel know that a decade ago, 2 decades ago, it was not fashionable. So those of us who were trying to push this story out there, we were met with great challenges. Now there's kind of broad agreement that this story, the full story, as Susana was saying, who built Austin, who built the trails, you know, what does that trail represent? You know, and all of the public spaces. And many of these parks, by the way, were former plantations, I want to remind folks, but we won't see any of that in a marker as of now. But it's become fashionable to tell the story, but who is telling the story? All too often, people who look like us are not involved in telling these stories. And this is what's got to change. I have no qualms with John Meacham writing an autobiography, a biography, I should say, of the late John Lewis. No problem with that. Although, you know, you wonder why Meacham has never written about an African-American, you know, civil rights or historic feature. In all of the works, in all of his career, he has never written about one. But again, times change, and now he has this book about John Lewis, and that's all great. But my point is, well, first of all, you ought to read John Lewis's own memoir, Walking with the Wind, before you read Meacham's book. But my point is simply that white people who engage in this work need to partner with Indigenous, Brown, Black, Asian people, because when you don't, we run into the same kinds of issues that we had in the past in terms of telling the full story, how the story gets told, white fragility, and all of the things that go into that mix. And I want to give Susana a chance to add or subtract anything from that.
Yeah, I think Tanya's on board now, so we might want to just go to her real quickly.
She's still connecting to audio or trying.
Oh, okay, I saw her popped up, so I thought that, yeah, Yeah, and I think that's so very true what Alberta is saying. So many times we have people documenting our stories, doing videos, but without the input of those people that were very much impacted or part of the story that they're telling. And so I think it's very important to hear the voices. During the environmental justice movement, we had the motto, we speak for ourselves. And I think that people should respect that they should listen to the people who were impacted, who did the struggle, who worked to make changes, and to make sure that their voices are the ones that are telling the story. That's so very important.
And Miriam, I want to give one more example of how this plays out if you're not partnering with an Indigenous Latino person or an African American. So I was interviewing some of the first African Americans when they allowed Black people to serve on the police force here in Austin. So I was talking to one of the retired lieutenants who served on the Austin police force, Lieutenant Maxwell, and he became a captain as well. And so I got to talking with him, and he told me this story. He told her, and it was like, oh, okay, he got into the Austin Police Department, and it might not have been great, but it really wasn't all that bad. And we're talking about the 50s, the 1950s, and we could go into, if we had some time, what it was like in Austin in the 1950s, because I've done a lot of research on that as well. But so at the end of that story, I said, Captain Maxwell, this is kind of interesting because I'm a Black journalist. I was talking to him on the phone, and I came along decades after you, and the challenges that I have faced were so much greater than yours. I'm glad you had such an easy time, Captain. He says, oh, are you Black? And I said, yes, I am. And he says, oh, well, then let me tell you what really happened. So had, he believed for a moment that I was white. And he was telling me a story that he thought a white person could hear. He didn't trust that voice enough to tell the truth. But when he found out I was Black, I got the real story, which was a totally different story. And we know that this also happened in the slave narratives, by the way, when they sent all of those young white people out to interview former slaves. So that's why it's important, as Susana was saying, to make sure that the people who are impacted, that you are partnering with someone who is doing this work.
Yes. Tanya, are you connected now? Okay, I'm gonna ask a question. So how does a park, a trail, or Lady Bird Lake take into consideration the neighborhoods and the cultures along its shorelines?
Anna, you want to take that first?
Okay. Yeah, I think it's real important because, when we talk about, Town Lake and now Lady Bird Lake, there was a big fight in the Mexican-American Chicano movement regarding that lake and the development of that lake, because at that time, I don't know if y'all remember the boat races, which were being held in the late 70s. We call it boat racism because of all the noise and impact on the community, right? And so what the community did after that big struggle and that big fight, the city had to recognize that there was, a Chicano Mexican American community there, and that we had our own customs and our own beliefs and values. And boat racing wasn't one of those because it was extremely loud, very loud. It's like if you go to the racetrack and you hear all that, and that's a constant, but the trash that came about it and the disrespect of the environment once the boat races were over, people just felt like, well, we don't have to clean up. They would just leave all the trash and all that. Again, here you recognizing the customs of the people who are adjacent to the parkland. was that their whole thing was, how do we preserve it, and how do we preserve it for families? Because we come from a family-based culture, not a culture of just individuals and just, you know, partying, but family. How do you include the whole family? So when we look at the open spaces and we look at the parks, we always think about family. So how do you make that park so that it's also geared to families, right? To make sure that there's amenities for children, for teenagers, and for the elders. And how do you make it a family-based place? One of the things we worked on very early was the fishing piers, being that we pushed to have them there along Town Lake, because a lot of our people used to fish along there. So again, how do you sustain yourself? Of course, later on, the contamination came into Town Lake, and so it wasn't really safe to be eating the fish from there. But before, people don't believe it, but we used to swim in Town Lake. That's how clean and pure it was, you know, in the 70s and 80s. We actually all swam in, and we would compete, try to see if we could make it from one side of the shore to the next. I was never able to do it, but it was a lot of fun. And so how do you make, you know, the trail, the park itself, the waters, something that families could be, but also what grew around that were like Fiesta Gardens, you know, having the swimming pool there, because again, you're talking about families. How do families have access to the park? And that became like the Cinco de Mayo, the 16 de Septiembre, you know, weddings and celebrations in the smaller pavilion, birthday parties, and you could just, everything that you could have. So again, attracting family-based culture by holding these different celebrations, traditions, and activities, and not really just based on individuals or people who wouldn't use the entire park to its beauty, right? And so I think that we even had some of the elders, when they saw the erosion, that they said we needed to plant plants along, you know, the river there, Town Lake, in order to mitigate the erosion that was happening along Town Lake. So it's here again, we had our elders who were very conscious about the river and the trail. And sometimes trails get built too close to the river's edge, that it causes this additional erosion to happen. And our elders were very conscious about that, and very conscious about the trees, right? Because trees are sacred. And so when you look at not just traditions, but you also look at indigenous beliefs about how waters are sacred, how, you know, the trees are sacred, and how open space is sacred, and that it has a spirituality. For us, it had more of a spirituality. How does openness and space and trees and waters play a part in our spirituality? Because as people get locked into these high building and high towers, or they live in gated communities, spirituality, they're being disconnected from the earth. And so the ability to make sure that the earth, the ground, the trails, that you could still walk on with your bare feet if you wanted to. I think those are all things that we need to be really looking at as part of the whole preservation, the customs, the stories of the people, right? Because that's what has happened around, you know, Chicano Park. And wasn't, I think last year, a big protest, because, you know, that is a place where the lowriders come every weekend, especially on Sundays, and families come. And so there was protests because people now living in the new towers there on Comad didn't like to see all these Latin people in their cars and their music and everything. They didn't respect that this had been a tradition that's been going on as long as I can remember. And I'm a native of East Austin. And that, again, how do you embrace other people's cultures and other people's belief, and try to say that your culture and your belief is the only one, when the people were the indigenous people to that particular park? Because we all know the history of how we were forced to live in East Austin. And like that's why I say we build it with our own sweat, tears, and blood. And now you're all of a sudden it's like the land is no longer yours, you know. And then we began to see like the murals, they began to fade, you know, people graffiti them. All of that is part of the culture that's telling the story. And you see down there, there's little baseball fields with little children. Again, it's about families. So I think that really tells a story that we cannot forget of how do we keep including family and the activities and the traditions that have been sacred for such a long time.
Thank you. And Alberta, you're on mute.
Okay, well, I just got carried away listening to my sister Susana. I want to say ashe to her because, you know, she just makes it happen, and she just, you know, makes me feel very spiritual, and ashe is the African word, the word for yes, good, make it happen. And I should say it's Swahili because Africa is a huge continent. But I want to say, getting back to the trail question and the lakes question about how do you make it everybody's space? How do you do that now in 2022 going forward? First, I think you have to go back and understand a little bit of history. So forgive me for going back, but we have to, I know people are tired of talking about slavery, and they say slavery is dead, slavery is over. We didn't have slaves, but the system that slavery created is with us today. The system that slavery created is with us today. That's institutional racism and systemic racism that comes out of a system of slavery. So I want to say that because we cannot begin to dismantle and remantle and reconstruct unless we understand that fundamental truth. We also have to go dig back in Austin's history, back to 1928 and prior, because before 1928, Black people lived all over the city and in freedmen communities all around Austin, all up and down the lake. One place was Pease Park area, which the Pease Park was a former plantation and Black people lived on the plantation. And yesterday I was there as we did a ceremony there and began to reinterpret the story, the full story around Pease Park. So the 1928 plan that segregated Austin, that created a racially partitioned city. This city was racially partitioned by the 1928 master plan that said all Black people had to live in the Negro district. And so it set off trends that are with us today, whether it was redlining, whether it was you know, segregated schools and inferior, separate but unequal schools, a whole lot of things, poverty, and people had to sell their homes in Clarksville and Wheatville, and all of these other places where freed Black people owned homes and land for dimes on the dollar. So we have to understand what happened. And Black people, almost from the time they arrived in Austin, they got here, they have been policed out of certain areas of the city. And so the areas, many of them along the trail and the lake, because people wanted to live by the water at that point in time, you know, back in the 1800s, that was the preferred place to live in some ways, because the water was the way that you transportation, and the way that you went and got, you know, you didn't have electricity and running water. So there were many reasons to live close to the water. Black people were policed out of those areas. Barton Springs and Zilka Park, another former plantation. So when you understand that these ghosts of segregation still live with us today and inform us as to why they're You don't see many Black people by and large on the trail or using the trail or in Zilker Park or at the springs. These are the things. I was talking to an 83-year-old gentleman. He is in the class of the first undergraduates to enroll at the University of Texas at Austin in 1956. He says that today he has a hard time walking on the West Campus because that his heart starts beating quickly, because back then you could not walk on the West Campus. So like I said, the system that slavery created and segregation and Jim Crow created is with us today. So in order to make these spaces that Susana is talking about, the spirituality of it, the space of it, the openness, the greenness of it, if you truly want to make those places inclusive, then you've got to recognize what happened. You've got to embrace that. You've got to own that. And then you've got to work with people of color to understand, well, how do we take this to the next level? How do we, okay, we have Voma Overton Senior Park. That's a good step forward. But what kind of story do we tell when they built the boardwalk? They have all of these Western belts as markers for music. Well, country music, but we know that there were blues and jazz and Tejano music, and all of that came out of, Austin. So how do you celebrate that? It has to be done in the planning stages, believe it or not. So I sit on the ECHO board, which is a board that oversees the homeless population here, and how you address houselessness. And African Americans make up the largest single group of houseless people in the city of Austin, and I'm not proud of that. 4 times our numbers. We are 7.5% of the population, but 40% of the houseless people. So when they got to doing this big summit, they put together a planning group of people. Everybody around the table was white, and most people around that table were wealthy. And people like myself had to challenge that and say, what are you doing? We understand you're well-intended, but this is not going to work. It's not going to work. So those are the things we have to do as a community. We have to recognize our past and understand that the system that we have, and I'm talking about city government. Yes, I'm talking about city government. That's one of the structures that Jim Crow and slavery created that is still, because it is so much about the status quo. And when all you're doing is maintaining the status quo, you're not dismantling Jim Crow. So those are the kinds of steps. I know I sound a bit radical. I apologize for that up front, but those are the kind of steps that it's going to take.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. All right, we're going to open it up to any questions.
I would just like to say that, Alberta, you should never apologize.
Yeah.
We're done apologizing. I'll leave it to others.
And if there are, okay, Meredith.
I was just going to say, is there an example of a planning project or an artist project or anything like that that you could point to as a good model to move forward, where we're acknowledging everything that's happened, our past, our history? Is there an example project that either of y'all would share with us?
So I have one example. As I said yesterday, I was at Peace Park. And so the Conservancy has added Black people to the board of the Conservancy. And so now what they're doing is reinterpreting the park in a way that tells the full story. So they're on that road and that journey to do that. And I think that that's a good thing. As I said, you have to work with people who look like me, who look like Susana, you know, to do these things. So finally, you know, and when you, and again, the structures that are created by slavery, look around at the conservancies in this city. Look around. Look at the parks that have them. I'm not sure a single park on the east side has a conservancy or a traditionally Black park or brown park, not Walter E. Long, no, not Decker Lake, not Guerrero. Okay, but then you look at the parks that have conservancies and those boards, then look at the boards. So the Peace Park example is something that I think is very hopeful. It's very hopeful because they have not just one Black person, not just one Latino person, but they have a critical mass of people that they have recruited to their board, and now they're reinterpreting Peace Park to tell the full story.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Can I just say one more thing? Samantha, I mean, you need to talk a little bit about the Negro School. I mean, you need to talk a little bit about that.
Can't hear.
Uh-oh, Susana, we can't hear you.
Okay,
There we go.
There we go.
Okay, okay. Yeah, just real briefly about Chicano Park, which is around the town lake there, which is now renamed Edward and Dawn Park. And so that took a long time when Alberta talked about how long, well, that took a long time to rename that park to Edward and Dawn Park, you know. And so when we look at that park, it also now, just by the name itself, sends a flag that the Latinx people live around that area or had something to do with the park. That's why it's really important that we also have renamed these parks after people of color, because that itself says there must be a story there. Now they've had murals and they're recommissioned people to redo the murals. I think the murals need to do a little bit more in telling the story of the struggle and not just being abstract. And sometimes I think the arts in public places don't really put out when they put out the call, they don't put out the call that says, look, this has to be culture, it has to identify with the community, it has to tell a story, because that's what we did when the Montopolis Recreation Center. We said, no, we don't want artists from New York and California. We want artists that are Latino, people of color, and for the community. And I can tell you, if you have a chance to come see the Montopolis Rec Center, it's one of the most beautiful things, whether it's sculpture, whether it's murals, whether it's all different things, but it tells a real story and has pictures of people from the community. Now, one of the things we were able to do is under the Montopolis Bridge along the Colorado River with the new highway coming in, the toll road, was able to get them to redevelop that. And then also there's supposed to be hanging history down there. I saw the site, I mean, the plaque where is there, the history is not there yet written, but we had to say, you have to tell the story. So I think that having, plaques or different ways of being able to record and tell the story is very important, so that people want to read it as they come by. They'll know the real story instead of just saying, well, it's the Edward and Dawn Park, but what was the history that it took, to create that park and so forth. And then the other thing that Alberta said real quickly is the historic Negro School, how that school, the developer wanted to demolish, that historical school, and how we had to step in to stop the breaking down or just tearing down history. And how important that was, because it was one of the first historic Negro schools here. And it told a story. And matter of fact, we still had students that were alive in their late 70s and 80s, and pictures of them. Marvin Griffin, actually, which had a big part to do with the Carver Museum and Library, was one of the people that went to the school. And so right now we're in the process of working with PARD as being the group to do a strategic plan of planning for the school, as the museum, and other things, as we hear from the community. But this is the first time it's going to be by the community, run by the community, and also making sure that the community is at the table. And so we're very glad that we're very persistent in saying, we need to do, and we're very glad that we're in the time of equity, right? Because we're in the moment of equity. And so equity has played a big part in making sure that we get funding, that we are the ones that are running these projects and talking about the projects. And so to me, is equity. I'm very glad that we've gotten into this era of equity because it's part of addressing a lot of the racism that has occurred, right? And making sure, but I think that that's going to be the change coming forward. And then what do we do like with the new John Trevino Park, looking at that, but the new 48 acres that was just purchased or swapped in the bond that was just passed recently, the proposition. And so there's more land that's going to be open space and dedicated. And how do we make sure that also reflects communities of color, because it is east of I-35. And so how do we make sure maybe there's there's African American, Latino, sort of like the Conley Guerrero Center. Is duality, is African American and Latino. And I think we need to be looking at how we work on those dualities as we name these new parks east of Austin.
Do you want to add anything else?
Yeah, I would say how we named it all across Austin. I would add to that, Susana, because as I said, African Americans live all over Austin, and so the footprints were left all over Austin. And I just want to add one more thing. I don't know how we are on time. We're probably out of time, but I do want to say that in my career as a journalist, one of the things I did was, and it had to be done at the time, and this was only 5 years ago, the city did not have preservation sites that got landmarks. They did not have those logged according to, well, is this site associated with Black people, or is this site associated with Latino people? So I collected all that data by hand and then identified it by hand. And as I said, this is 5 years ago, and maybe there's more to add to it, hopefully, God willing. And maybe they are logging it now in the computer by ethnicity and by race, so that we understand this is data that we need, because when you have data, you can make a difference. But what I found out in the 600 sites at the time that got landmark status in Austin, 40 of those were associated with African Americans. And I reported this, broke this story in the Austin American Statesman, and 20 were Latino, 40 African American, 20 Latino, getting back to the system that set up the situation. So the system was Jim Crowed, and it's a system that has come out and been structurally racist for some time. So this is what it produced in terms of sites that were recognized formally as landmarks. And what did that do? What did that do? How did that then manifest itself? It manifested itself, Susana, Danielle, Miriam, Meredith, Carmen, and everyone else on this panel, in massive and speedy bulldozing of structures in this city that should have been landmarked historic. So developers gobbled up parts of Latino East Austin and Black East Austin, and there's hardly a shotgun shack left in town. And God knows, 20 years ago, we had them all over the place, or whatever, because there was no value. And it's not
Mhm.
just shotgun shacks, but it's historic homes, homes that would have been historic, buildings. We have the Gold Dollar building now that's being threatened by progress, if you will, and it is landmarked and it's still being threatened. Susana mentioned the Montopolis Negro School, threatened. It was about to be bulldozed because the developer could easily go to City Hall, get, and almost did, get a permit to bulldoze that structure with impunity. There was no checks and balances on our structure, no value, no value. Do you hear me? No value put to the things that were historic in our community. So this is what that manifested, the system of landmarking in this city. So if we don't get busy and get busy in a hurry, Miriam, if your group and other groups are not out there getting busy in a hurry, it's vanishing, people. It is vanishing.
Mhm. Yeah.
Thank you, Alberta, Susana, thank you so much. I just want to say I look up to y'all, and y'all are the reason why I do the work that I do. Danielle, Carmen, y'all are the same. Meredith, obviously. Yeah, so thank you so much. We're gonna, Susana, do y'all have anything else to say?
No, I like to end with this indigenous saying. There was a time when we were all sisters and brothers, the night sky our ceiling, the earth our mother, our brothers, the sun our father, our parents our leaders, and justice their guide. Amen.
Wow.
And with that, we'll be going to break, 5-minute break, and then we'll come back for climate change and resilience. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Want to call everybody back from break? All right. Our next session is Climate Change and Resilience. That will be led by Stacy Levy.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back from your break. And I wanted to start with saying how climate change is percolating in our world from all sides, and expected and very unexpected ways too. And some of the first impacts we see are changes to water with increased flooding and algae growth, and changes to shoreline vegetation. All of these things that we see right in our urban parks and along and within urban waterways. So I'm very interested in hearing from our very exciting guests, our speakers for this session, about the issue of what's coming towards us, and how we're gonna deal with it. I want to introduce our speakers, Carmen Pulido from Go Austin, Vamos Austin, GAVA, and Miriam Solis, Associate Professor at the University of Texas School of Architecture. Can you start by talking about what you're dealing with in your institutions, and then we can tackle some other questions too? Do you want to start, Carmen? Do you want to start?
Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see you all, and wonderful to hear once again from some of my most esteemed mentors in the community, and friends and colleagues. And great to be here also with Miriam Solis and Stacy Levy. So I am a second-gen community organizer. My dad, Llanes, is here. I grew up as one of those kids getting toted around in meetings and at City Hall in a backpack, or coloring on the floor, and I inadvertently ended up becoming myself a community organizer by profession, and have been involved with GAVA since it was a foundation-driven grant project in Dove Springs that started in 2012. And I was a community organizer at that time, working for Marathon Kids, actually, which was a evidence-based running program in K through 12 elementaries, I'm sorry, K through 5 elementaries, all over Austin, and actually in cities across the country. And I was organizing with parents and teachers in 18 Title I schools in Austin's Eastern Crescent to specifically bring in more nutrition and fitness options. This was after I really cut my teeth as a community organizer at Poder, under Susana's mentorship and the mentorship of our environmental justice movement. That's where I first learned community organizing, and then I got tested in elementary schools, out of the spotlight, away from what was considered often some of the more controversial politics that we were experiencing as communities of color, and really thrown into the everyday lives of parents with school-aged children, and guardians and teachers and faculty and staff and neighbors, who were all trying to figure out how to bring our kids up in the healthiest environment possible, because we were seeing so many health disparities among our kids. So that really tested me in working with regular folks and meeting people where they were at, and the confines of the school world, the busy life of teachers and parents. And 4 of those elementary schools that I was working with were in Dove Springs in Southeast Austin. And at that time, the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation was interested in making a 5-year investment to intervene in high rates of childhood obesity, because that was a really big philanthropic and public health concern in the mid 2000s. So they were looking at where they could invest in a community that had perhaps assets that could be invested in because they were underinvested, like green space that wasn't accessible to the community. And also social infrastructure, existing legacy of community organizing, which Southeast Austin had, because they had to fight for every single thing they got in Southeast Austin. So there was this legacy and this social infrastructure of communities that had come together to get what they needed, and nonprofits that were doing a lot of stuff in the area as well, because the area flags on all of the socioeconomic, indicators, right? So here came Dell with a childhood obesity intervention. I was working with parents and teachers, got involved. Long story short, many different partners, many collaborators, different structures. Eventually, this became about social determinants of health and really looking at where we live, work, learn, play, and worship, and how those things impact our health more than our time at the doctor's office. Well, where did I first learn about where we live, work, learn, play, and worship? In the environmental justice movement. I learned about those things at Poder. I learned about those things from the Southwest Network for Environmental and Economic Justice, from the Highlander Center, from all these incredible Black, Brown, Native, and Asian communities that had fought industrial toxins in their communities. And here we were now confronted with climate change, creating some of the worst catastrophic floods that we've ever seen. In a 5-year, heavily measured childhood obesity intervention, without measuring people's food or prescribing fitness routines, we were able to stabilize adult BMIs. In other words, stabilize weight gain among adults through population health strategies, improving parks, playgrounds, lighting, pedestrian infrastructure, healthy food options, school meals, etc. Child BMIs went through the roof. But there were many omitted variables in these evaluations, including the fact that there were 2 catastrophic floods during this time. So GAVA's work evolved to tackle different social determinants, but also to become more independent. Eventually we spun off in 2018, and also to become more resident-led and to incorporate more explicit anti-racist community organizers who were willing to take on things like displacement and climate change as part of these social determinants. And here we are now using the same methodology we apply to improve parks and green spaces and bring in healthy food, to fix drainage infrastructure and get better disaster preparedness policy, and to protect people where they are and make investments that help them stay where they are, because that's how we build stability and health. So we've redefined resilience as response and responsibility, because resilience as a buzzword is officially killing people because it's causing stagnation at the leadership level and institutional level. When in community, what it really means is, how do we respond when something goes wrong, and how do we take responsibility for ourselves and each other? How do our institutions respond, and how do they take responsibility for hundreds of years of systemic inequities and transforming them now? And that's how it intersects here. But for me, I'm sorry for the long intro, but this is my whole talk on resilience in a nutshell for GAVA. For me, as an organizer in this community, resilience has been defined and redefined, both in our institutions and in our communities. But there are very key principles about it, and they all exist in the network and the web of our culture and who we are, the way that we learn from each other, the way that we learn from history to get us through what we're facing. And since we're here talking about arts and cultural preservation, remembering our history, learning from our history, understanding how we got here, understanding why there is an East Austin, why there is a South Austin. All of that is carried in our culture and our history and our art. And in all of our cultures, in all of our indigenous cultures, no matter where we come from or what color we are, before our arts and culture were commodified, they were codified knowledge. They were the way that we have learned from our ancestors. They're the way we have passed down best practices. They're the way we've learned our lessons and taught lessons learned. And they're the way that we rejuvenate and restore ourselves, replenish ourselves, which is one of the critical components of resilience. So all of that to say that our work is very multi-issue, because in the words of Audre Lorde, we don't live single issue lives, right? GAVA was a place-based intervention, which meant we could tackle all these different issues in one place. It's complex, but not too complicated. It's really about where we are, who we're around, how we take care of each other. And so GAVA's work now, even though we still care about healthy food, physical activity, and we still benchmark our success in policy and funding, we're really looking now more about care, how we care for the caretaker, how we look out for those who look out for each other, understanding that anything we give to them goes right back out into the community, and that sustainability for us in the 2020s, especially in the face of these increasing floods, shocks, stressors, heat, it's going to be ever more critical that we top off the tank whenever we can, that we replenish, and that we care for each other. And those are really principles that, as much as we can study and collect data around and measure it carefully, the first place I learned that was in the environmental justice movement, where I learned where we could take 4-day work weeks and cater to people raising children and taking care of elders, because that's how we keep our movement sustainable. So that's resilience as it intersects in our work today, cuts across population health and climate justice.
No, that's just a wonderful way of forming a way of thinking about things and opening up what we often, when we get that word resilience and we sort of stop at like, that just means being stronger, and it means being really different in so many ways. It's great. Thank you, Carmen, for expanding our sense of that. Miriam, what are you thinking these days about resiliency?
Yeah, thank you for the introduction, Stacy. And it really is an honor to be here, being a co-panelist with Carmen, although I have to say I'd be fine just being an audience member today, because everything I've heard has been very helpful and insightful. And I actually, the conversations around organizing and early upbringing and experience and how that relates to what I'm doing now very much resonate. So unlike most of our panelists, I'm not from Texas. I grew up in California, Central Valley. I grew up in a predominantly Mexican, Chicano, and Southeast Asian community. So I grew up with a lot of refugees, a lot of immigrants, kids of immigrants. I myself am the daughter of working class Mexican immigrants. And one of my first jobs in high school was working with a community-based organization that did a lot of organizing in the community. The particular thing that I was involved in that hooked me was I lived in the zip code with one of the state's highest teen pregnancy rates. So there was a huge influx of funding and programming that a lot of us youth were able to participate in. I was fortunate to pursue higher education with the support of a lot of mentors. And I always wondered what my continued role would be in supporting social change efforts. I found that research, when carried out in certain ways, can support causes for social justice, for environmental justice. One of the other efforts that I was very influenced by in those early years, for example, was the United Farm Worker Movement. They actually had a very, very important role in bringing attention to major environmental issues in the region where I'm from. And it hasn't always been considered environmental justice or even climate justice, but in retrospect, that movement was sounding the alarm on things that have just worsened. And so for me, the connection between environmental justice has very much been about climate justice. And in that sense, climate change and the consequences of it, as we're seeing them today, have been felt by communities for, you could say, centuries. And I appreciate the conversation about slavery, because slavery and colonization have both been huge driving factors in what has created a fossil fuel-based economy, and are what a lot of community-based organizations, city governments like Austin, are responding to in the form of climate action. So in terms of my current role as a researcher, I'm very fortunate to be able to engage in a lot of these conversations as a faculty member, where I conduct research and teach about environmental justice. But I'm also on Planet Texas 2050, which is an interdisciplinary research initiative supported by the university that's encouraging us to think about responding to environmental issues differently. And based on my own orientation and training, one of the ways in which we can link the need to take climate action, in this particular case, when we think about the role of trails, we're often talking about mitigation, right? We're thinking about the need for green space, the green space that provides oxygen and reduces carbon emissions. how can we do it in ways that are more equitable? And one tool that many researchers have worked to develop is research methods that lend themselves to not reinforcing kind of the exploitative relationships that are often a big part of research. And in this sense, it brings attention to how the physical sciences, it's interesting that science has become a very politicized topic. Physical science has become a very politicized topic with regard to climate change. But what historically marginalized communities know, as Carmen was pointing out, is that even the physical sciences haven't always been, that research hasn't always been done in service of communities of color, and has actually worked against bringing light, shedding light on the particular injustices that communities experience when it comes to how we coexist in the built and natural world, and how to work toward creating a more socially just environment. So one thing, so I'll mention a couple of methodologies that I think some of us researchers are working to bring into our work and have been very, very intentional about using in order to try to put social change and social action at the forefront. And that involves oftentimes community-based participatory research. This is a particular methodological orientation. It involves working with people who are at the forefront of experiencing climate injustices, and then being led by their particular priorities and concerns and visions for the future. And what it also does is link research to action. So oftentimes research is carried out amongst what we might call researchers with formal educational training, who have been credentialed to carry out particular forms of research. But when we're approaching research from a community-based participatory research lens, we're actually turning that on its head and being led by the questions, the research questions and priorities that people who are experiencing climate injustices have. There's been a lot of work done on this that looks at how historically, one of the reasons it's important to be led by community is that research can be carried out in very exploitative ways. And so even when the intent is there, oftentimes we can do things in very, very harmful ways when working within a large institutional context. And so the folks that I'm collaborating with within the University of Texas at Austin and I are very excited about drawing on these particular tools and methods in partnership with local communities in order to respond to not only climate injustices, but what a more green future may look like. And I've said a lot, so I'll stop there.
Wow, this is great. This is just such a bounty and breadth of information, and the last session is just incredible. And I think this is going to be this is so informative to us as artists, because we are often not always thinking about these intricacies that we really need to know about. We need to collaborate not only amongst ourselves, but with more information and other views into what we're doing. So this is great. And actually, I'm interested to find out a little bit more about how you think that art could get into a community's thinking about resilience. Are there some thoughts you have when you hear that art is starting to investigate this? And what are your thoughts about that? Anyone can jump in.
I mean, art is a part of life. And the way that we create space for artistic expression and capturing things, the way that we invest in an environment, in our environment of Austin, to nurture those things is all related to how much we're able to benefit. I mean, I think that's the struggle, is this externalization of art. When I think of where art is intersecting for us, we are investing as an organization, Go Austin, Vamos Austin, is now investing much more in the art of story making and sharing, especially through film and short film. And some of that is, I mean, that is extremely artistic work, but it will be shown as advocacy work, you know. But there's also there's really also just the engagement. I mean, we've done some really incredible community planning activities on East Williamson Creek, where we've had, we work with Professor Bjorn Sleto, who I also met at Poder 15 years ago when his class was doing GIS mapping to show how children were avoiding the metal foundry pure casting on their way to Zavala Elementary. So we had a great rapport, and we joined together to do some work to support the East Williamson Creek park adopters, who are almost all predominantly Mexican and Central American neighbors who have adopted and stewarded this portion of East Williamson Creek, which is a gem that lots of folks from South Austin have known as a treasure. And so in combination with those neighbors, the School of Architecture graduate students and youth from Urban Roots, who have been working on a South Austin internship with us, and several of whom live in the area, we were able to get these perspectives through oral conversations, through writing activities, and through drawing, to get these interpretations of people's relationship with the creek, their relationship with the Greenbelt. That includes everything from the story of the flooding to the way people see this green space as a place of healing and mental health for them. The different perceptions of safety and what's considered a threat or a benefit, the attitudes toward the wildlife and a natural environment. And so those intergenerational perspectives are really, really critical, but using artistic and creative expression, creating the space for that, capturing that, giving value to that intrinsically is what makes the experience human. It's what makes it real for the people who are directly impacted. And it also makes it real for the institutional people, because once we bring the city of Austin in, it's a very different experience to apply for those programs and swim through bureaucracy for years trying to get funding and investment for a trailhead the kind of stuff you've seen in West Austin for 50 years in Southeast Austin. But when they come out and walk the creek, and when they see these beautiful spiral bound, colorful, artistic renderings that the School of Architecture has poured energy into bringing to life, it is human, and it is the creek. And so they put this beautiful representation together called Donde Corre el Agua. And as much as I love, it's where the water runs. It's in Spanish and English, with Spanish first. And as much as I love the document as a beautiful representation of community engagement, I also would love for everyone in planning and zoning to read through it, because this is community planning. Not just because it feels good, but because tangibly and practically, even from erosion to walkability to everything else, this is how you get it. And it's art. There's art and culture at the center of all of it. We may not call it that, but that's really what makes it come to life.
Yeah, so I'll chime in and say that, art has historically been a very critical way in which communities express themselves. And I love that earlier in a panelist mentioned lowriders as a critical way in which community members created an art form. Another example that I like to think of is graffiti art. And it's it's now well documented that it's been a critical element, was a critical element, continues to be, of hip hop. And both forms of art were criminalized by cities that created ordinances that incarcerated people who created that form of art. And so I think that one of the things that art draws our attention to is that it's there, it's been there. The question is who has the opportunity to share whose art is valued and how. In my work with youth, particularly youth of color, we talk a lot about how youth of color are often approached with deficit thinking, right? But that they don't have meaningful ideas to contribute. But in fact, because of how youth of color are consistently marginalized, they're constantly creating new space and navigating new space in a world that often unwelcomes them. And so art exists in communities, and we're seeing, as others have pointed out, we're seeing institutional changes, organizational changes to draw attention to that and elevate that. One thing that I think that in the context of the conversation about the trail is important to think about are the workers who create these exhibits, who maintain park space. When we're thinking about the trail and climate change, something that I'm sure has already come up, certainly actually, with regard to Beili's presentation, is climate change is already affecting trails and parks. And the people who care for that land are probably workers of color. And they uniquely know the land, they uniquely know these exhibits and maps and signs. So in terms of how climate change connects to the trail and art, I think that one of the things that is a part of the conversation that needs to continue to develop is how the people caring for these places are also being cared for, and how their knowledge is going to be valued in the process of building these great exhibits and maintaining them.
That's a very interesting point, and certainly something that's quite forgotten in the typical art making mechanisms. That's fascinating. That's great. Do we have any questions from the others on the in the workshop?
Or even if Miriam has a question for Carmen, or Carmen has a question for Miriam, we can just open up.
Sure. Well, I mean, I'll start just with a comment, because some of what Miriam just said really resonated as I thought about in Austin, the people who make up the front lines of our Parks and Recreations Department, of our Watershed Protection Department, who look after our parks and green belts and our trails. And I also am always so impressed at the level of community knowledge that is held by those workers, but also by the residents themselves. One of the things that I've heard Francisca Cunha on our team at GAVA, our lead climate resilience organizer, who lives on a tributary of East Williamson Creek. She and her neighbors have said often to the engineers at Watershed Protection, a lot of us are from Mexico, from places where it floods, but our buildings don't flood because we know how to build channels and drainage to keep them from flooding. And we're not engineers, but we could probably help you come up with some solutions here. And, you don't have to be an engineer to know the pressure in your legs when the water starts to rise and the danger of the flooding, if you know how flooding occurs, right? There are not to mention, there are so many of the areas we work in now in North Austin, highly diverse communities, highly international communities, lots of people who come from places that have dealt with heat waves worse than we have in Texas for longer than we've dealt with. And there are practical ways that people deal with these things. Even though the threats are increasing in frequency and intensity, these are not new things, right? We live in Flash Flood Alley. We live in Central Texas where it gets really, really hot and dry. So there are ways that people have learned to deal with this since people have been here. And there are also ways that people bring that knowledge and workers have that knowledge. And so I just really appreciated, Miriam, that you said that, because the first thing I thought of was all of the Chicanos and Mexicanos who work in our urban forestry department, who care for our trees, who know a lot of things about the way our ecosystems work, and how are we capturing and sharing and carrying on that knowledge. And I also am seeing how that comes to play in some of these green job and workforce programs. We have the Austin Civilian Conservation Corps, for example, which is right now doing a lot of preserve work. And we're actually partnering with them as GAVA to do diversity, equity, and inclusion training. I'm putting it in quotes, not because it's not DEI, because we do that, by the book, but the practice is really to bring in lived experience, good old primary resources, people with 7 generations, 2 generations, 5 generations in Lower Onion Creek who talk about the history of this area and how it came to be, because that's where they were doing preserve work, right? And so we're looking at how, it's great to create a pipeline, skill building and jobs that pay people to do this green work and help support our ecosystems, but they're not paying enough. So now we're having conversations about equity and inclusion and diversity that really get at the root of what we need to do to realize a more just and equitable environmental vision. And so I wanted to ask Miriam, because she brings a lot of expertise to this area as well, and just sort of looking at how these movements intersect and how they've been growing their edge, right? Environmentalism, social justice, environmental justice, and also green, this green era and all of its conflicts. And so we're talking about intergenerational, but I also I wonder, in thinking about that knowledge that exists with the workers and in our communities, and knowing, even with their caveats, these programs and initiatives that we've been watching launch, what do you see as possible? What do you think, not even so much what we're missing, if we could do it right? What are some of the things we could accomplish in this decade, do you think?
Yeah, Carmen, thanks for bringing that up. And I'm actually doing a photo voice project right now with some collaborators and students. Photo voice is where participants take photos of something and then share a story about that thing that they took a photo of.
This is your work with EcoRise, right?
No, this is actually with the Parks Department
and
the Austin Civilian Conservation Corps. Yeah. So I think this is where our kind of different projects are intersecting. I think that something that I'll mention that I think is very important is that this idea of wages and salaries is actually very important, because it gets at a very important part of environmental work, which is that for communities, the intersection between, for historically marginalized communities, the intersection between economic inequality and environmental inequality is totally there. The intersection is very strong, and communities are very aware of that. And so these large capital projects, when they're promoted by cities, they're often promoted as economic development strategies. So why can't they be equitable economic development strategies for historically marginalized communities, right? Why can't we think of them as vehicles to consider the economic inequalities that people who experience environmental injustices also experience? And so I think that we need to see a much stronger link between economic development as led by community-based organizations and large-scale environmental planning, capital project initiatives. And a lot of my research has been in the water sector, particularly wastewater. And there's story upon story in cities across the United States where communities have kind of come around, coalesced on creating a certain number of good jobs as part of particular planning initiatives. So I think that link needs to be stronger. And it actually, another part, something that I think a lot about, and several panelists have alluded to this, is the kind of changes that we're seeing amongst the large institutional actors or even smaller ones with regard to and what we might consider an increasing commitment to equity. And I would say that is, like others, I echo others saying that's a very positive thing. But we also don't want, it's everywhere now, equity. A lot of folks are doing equity. What does that mean? How do we ensure it's a meaningful type of equity? And so I think that, Carmen, I'm gonna turn it back to you and ask, you have had a very interesting role, an important role in creating relationships, sustaining relationships with large institutional actors. The University of Texas is one of them, these large philanthropic organizations, the city. How do you see community-based organizations, their particular role changing? Or another way of asking this question is, what are these larger institutional actors with larger amounts of resources doing differently, or ought to be doing differently, in order to ensure that communities are brought into the fold as we move forward?
I'm so glad you asked. I think we know what needs to change. If you pay people $17 an hour in Austin, Texas to do outdoor preserve work, you're going to attract wealthy kids whose parents can subsidize them at those wages, or $6 an hour is an AmeriCorps Vista, right? So we know that. They know that. We gave a workshop where young privileged students were saying, we're the only ones that can participate in this for these reasons. They're fully aware of it. The people at PARD are aware of it. The people at AmeriCorps are aware of it. Well, people at American Youth Works are aware of it, our local folks, right? And they're contracting GAVA to help with recruitment. And it was working for a while in the pandemic. And then it got to a point where it's like, people aren't going to do this. So the role of community groups is to stand together and be honest and be straight up with our partners. And the role of our partners in community-based organizations is to be honest with their institutions. And American Youth Works has to be honest with AmeriCorps at the federal level and say, we can't hire people below 20 to 25 an hour. Full stop. Have you heard? We're in an economic crisis and a pandemic. It's the same conversation around community health workers, who, I've said this all year, people who make six figures in institutions across many sectors are talking about community health workers as a solution from everything from vaccination gaps to police brutality. Community health workers are going to transform all of our systems, right, that are crumbling. These folks don't even know what community health workers make as an hourly wage. They don't even know they're on hourly wages. They think they have salary and benefits because that's what they have, right? So we need to level set our expectations, because our wealth gap is bigger than it's ever been. Our income inequality is bigger than it's ever been. And suddenly the people who are supposed to save the day, the first responders, the parent support specialists, the school counselors, the teachers, the early child care providers, the home-based nannies, right? All of these people, the community health workers, they're supposed to save the day. They're living the crisis too, and they're not getting paid enough. So we all have to stand together and call a spade, because when we stand together, that's the only way that we can actually face the beast of these larger institutions that individually we're far too afraid to say, it's not working. You have to change things, right? But if everybody goes, It's not working. That's a different way of standing up. So I think that's the role of our community organizations. It's also the role of the human beings in our institutions. And oftentimes I like to call them the dreamers in the bureaucracy, especially at the city of Austin, right? The people who go in with aspirations of transforming systems and they just hit wall after wall after wall in the system. And it's dehumanizing. It just builds dejection and this sort of feeling of resignation. And that's why we need our relationships, our human relationships, and inside and outside of these institutions, so that we can see each other and say, hey, you have to keep pushing because we're out here pushing too, and we're going to back you up. And you know what? At the end of the day, you are going to be the good guy. Because not only did you do the thing that was, righteous, you did the thing that was practical. You can't retain staff if you're not paying them enough. You can't run an organization, right? Our health premiums went up 45% year before last as a small nonprofit. We ate the cost. And I told my funders, guess what? Our fringe rate is 38% now. Deal with it. I know you have health insurance.
That is
so we just
we gotta very
stand
right
up.
on.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I could go on forever, but
No, but you've dug down to that important core, and it's really important. We're going a little over time, but it's really important to hear that. And I appreciate you bringing that, because it's often the sort of thing that doesn't get uncovered, even though it's everywhere. So thank you. This has been so illuminating and inspiring. And we're going to keep you in the loop, because this is, as when the artists we're all gathering and thinking, I think we're going to need to talk to you all again. So this is great. Thank you so very much. And now we're going to go on to a break, and then Meredith will introduce the environmental activism session right after our break.
loves me not. I picked a flower up from the ground and started pulling the petals off, one by one as I teared up. He loves me not. He loves me not. I kept walking down the trail feeling my blues, until I remembered that the world is bigger. Love is everywhere, in the trees, in the sunlight, in the strangers' faces that smile at me on my coldest days, on the warmest days. I love me, and I love this ground, this earth. I love me. This earth loves me. This breeze loves me. This trail loves me. I love me.
All right, coming back from break.
Everybody back? All right. Well, I am just completely honored to have a conversation with these three folks. Perry Bedford, he is a natural resource specialist at the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. Linda Guerrero is has a legacy of environmental activism and community involvement as a leader. And Daniel Llanes is an artist and an activist, and we've had many conversations about what role culture and art can play in terms of addressing issues and really looking at this trail in this place from an equitable perspective. So I'm going to just real quick start with Perry. I would love to just have an open conversation, because I feel when we were kind of talking about this and prepping for this, you all are just, you're experts in the field because of your experience and your commitment. So I'm gonna start with Perry and talk a little bit about his role at the natural resource. He's the natural resource specialist at the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. And so looking at it from the state level all the way down to the hyper local level. And I think we've heard so many things in the conversations today that all build upon what I believe as, you know, environmental activism. And you can see those commitments and that action in everything that we've heard. So, so Perry, I just have a high level question. As somebody who works in the field of environmental quality, how would you define environmental activism, or what would you like to see your role at TCEQ? Sorry, Miriam. To, you know, evolving.
I think it would be like, I would like to see more kind of direct correlation to my work to how it's helping more of the community. Mm-hmm. With what I do now, I'm mostly looking at site level emissions. So like a site for Chevron in Houston is reporting like their emissions inventory, which is basically accounting of like the different types of sources that they have, and then the emissions associated to those sources. So like tanks, engines, flares, and all that information is looked at like at the county level and state level. So it kind of, and that goes into rulemaking, and it's occasionally there will be like some kind of emissions issue with a certain site to where you could kind of see like directly how it's affecting the people of that community. And so with most of my work, I'm mostly just associating with the companies and the consultants with those companies, and so I don't really get a chance to interact directly with the community.
Got it. I think we've got it. Do you hear an echo?
Oh, no, I don't.
No, okay, just me then. Okay, so you've just joined the City of Austin Environmental Commission.
That's correct. I've been on the commission for a couple of years now, and what I like about the commission is now I'm actually seeing the faces to how it's affecting communities, like it be flooding issues or just like people with different like concerns with air quality or new building structures and particulate matter. Like I'm starting to see the faces to that, and it's kind of putting in perspective like a little bit of how my work kind of trickles down to where like people's concerns kind of elevate up to the level to where we're told what we should be focusing on when we're looking at the site's emissions. Like, okay, well, we've found out that some contaminants are more toxic to some people. Right now, I think EPA is heavily focused on anything having to do with ethylene oxide. And for those that don't know, ethylene oxide is a contaminant that's used in a lot of cleaning. So it's like industrial kind of cleaning, like medical cleaning, hospital cleaning, and they've discovered that it's very toxic to people and could be cancer inducing. So it's kind of like just from the community aspect, that's kind of elevated up to telling us, okay, you need to focus on this and look at these types of emission sources and ask more questions about this at this site because they produce these type of emission sources.
Right. So the serving on the commission really allows you to have a more sort of local focus.
Yes, it does.
Your work. Okay. And as a born and raised Austinite and a regular trail user, do you see, do you have your own desires in terms of making the trail a better place? Do you have a specific thought or, you know, a way that, I mean, when we had conversations and I heard Alberta say this earlier, it was like, there aren't many, you know, Black, or maybe this isn't exactly how you meant it, but there aren't a lot of people that look like me. Is there things that we can think about in terms of environmental activism being a little bit more, I would say community activism as well, and how can our actions as activists really help improve the environment of the trail?
Mm-hmm. Well, for me, it's like, touching back on what Alberta had mentioned earlier, yeah, I've noticed that, like, it's not a lot of people that, like, I don't see typically a lot of Black people that are walking on the trail. And just I've seen different posts online, or just sometimes people have kind of told me in passing that they sometimes feel that the trail isn't really a place for Black people, or like downtown area isn't really a place for Black people. And I just always find that interesting, and it makes me wonder if that's possibly why you don't really, like, I don't really see that many Black people that frequent the trails as often as I do. Or and it's like, I want people to be able to feel that they're welcome at the trail. Like, the trail is for everybody. This is everyone's city. So like, for when people say that they feel like they're unwelcome, I want to like come up with a way to where you say, like, you are seen, you are heard, you are welcome, you are included. This is your space as well. This is our shared space. And yeah,
that's okay. We don't need all answers. But I just thought it was important because we heard it in, you know, other conversations today.
Right.
So I just wanted to bring that up. And Linda, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, great. One of the things I found just incredibly powerful is your role as an activist for generation or for decades. So can you talk a little bit about, you know, in your service on commissions, in your service on boards, what really is that magic that that unlocks sort of action, I guess?
I would say that one of the great opportunities serving on boards and commissions with the city is that you're able to reach out and address concerns that the citizens bring forward. And as chair on the former chair on both the Parks Board and the Environmental Board, you're able to not only bring those concerns forward, but then propel something into action, putting it into a committee for further study, being able to spotlight or shed light on some sort of injustice or some sort of frustration that the community is very concerned about. And then what I don't love the extra work of a chair, but what I do like is being able to set an agenda and saying, I think this next agenda, staff needs to present something about this. So then you kind of are able to empower the community by bringing their concerns to the forefront and giving them at least a mic, a chance and an opportunity to speak about what is happening, and then being able to then shift it hopefully into a more positive direction where you then take staff and say, do you think something further is needed here? And what is it that we need to do? And then you have that same position of being able to do follow-up with that topic and saying, okay, y'all have had this for 6 months. What has been addressed thus far? Or what outreach has been done? We can ask them to do outreach with the community, or we can ask them to specifically focus on something that has been brought forward during a 3-minute citizen communication. So that's kind of a tactic that I've always used with the community, is that, look, the only way I can start pushing this and giving some leverage to it, if you come down, you speak for 3 minutes, then it will propel things into motion. And so, you know, what's really been great being both on the Parks Board and the Environmental Commission is things that I had not been able to completely finish with the Parks, being on the Parks Board. I could pick up, because they're so intertwined and they're so, and then push that forward. You know, when I felt like I was getting pushback from one department, take it to a different department and try to keep it in motion so that we did have a positive end result with something. And so I think it's very vital that people do, you know, volunteer, make that commitment, even if it's for a couple of years, because it's amazing what, if you are able to navigate the system and you're able to tolerate a lot of pushback from staff, you can really take things and move them forward. You know, when I was on the Parks Board, we found that nothing had been done on Lake Austin since the 50s when the LCRA gave it to the city of Austin. And we were able, I went to council members and said, we need a Lake Austin task force to look at these issues so that we could look at both Town Lake and Lake Austin and try to push in some ordinances. We were able to get 3 or 4 ordinances passed by council that otherwise would have just sat there stewing for another 20 or 30 years. Wow. So, you know, the other concern is that, you know, since the years that I've sat on boards and commissions, we now have a, you know, toxic algae bloom. That's indicative of climate change. That's indicative of how the lake is in crisis. Town Lake, Lady Bird Lake is in crisis, and it's popping up everywhere. You know, we now are in stages where we shut down to the public and to animals, saying, you can't go here anymore. So, I mean, this is very alarming. And when I heard the artist who had done the tree, you know, right now, the urban forestry is getting ready to tweak and change the environmental criteria for protecting trees. We need the citizens out there on Speak Up Austin looking at the changes that are getting ready to happen, because protecting trees is huge on the Environmental Commission. We're the only ones that can stop a heritage tree from being cut down. More and more the pressure is for those developers to cut down every single tree to build out. So we're losing our green infrastructure. Not only is there less in East Austin, just historically there's less green infrastructure, but now we're losing it in the center of town because they would much rather throw money for mitigation rather than to protect the tree. And it's a real trickle down system in the whole process of Austin, that, you know, the less we have, the more of what is produced, you know, how does that benefit the citizens? And so, you know, all of these bubbling things on Town Lake or Ladybird, I'm so old, Ladybird Lake are coming forward is that, you know, we've got the I-35 project coming up. We need a public environmental assessment of that. We've got, you know, these huge boats that are up and down the lake, lots of commercialism. And I'm afraid that that is a tendency to increase. How do we reduce it? How do we limit it? How do we give the lake a break, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, you had also brought up, you know, like, so future projects, I-35 and Project Connect. So there's two major transportation, you know, projects that are coming up in the next 5 to 10 years in terms of construction.
If they tunnel under the lake, I can't even imagine what that is, how that's going to happen and what that will mean.
Right.
For that, and what kind of effects it will be to the shoreline. And right now, you know, there are some still very pristine shorelines. And I really hope that we try to protect and keep them pristine, and that we don't, I hate to say it, put a boardwalk there, that we say, oh, this is sacred land. Can we just keep it sacred? Can we have, you know, this many feet of sacred land for the fauna and the flora?
Right, right. And Daniel, tell me what you think. You're an artist and you've been an activist for decades as well. You live on the east side, you live on the river. What do you see the role that artists can play in all of this?
Okay, if you want me to start there.
Or if you want to, you can start wherever you want.
But that's very good, actually, because it's very germane to this. And art is, has always been a traditional tool of any movement, any political movement, any kind of initiative. The artists have always been integral. I mean, you go to all the revolutions that you can think of. Today, you know, we're using internet, video, but posters, all of that. So art is definitely an integral part of political activism. Mm-hmm. But I do want to start out, if I may, is that all right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Good. Well, you know, what we're talking about here is the status quo of environmental, the environmental climate, you know, climate change, world change, et cetera, et cetera. And I have to say that in the same way that earlier other speakers pointed to systemic racism and the tradition of racism in the United States and here, well, I have to compare the white path and the red path. And the red path has throughout millennia been part of nature, a steward of nature, has learned from nature. As a matter of fact, I consider art as the aesthetics is the language of nature. Mm. And the red path considers itself part of nature. The white path considers itself separate and dominant of nature. And so that ideology, I'll just give you a very clear example. Today we have less than 10% of the forests in the United States since the coming of the Europeans, because of this sense of exploitation, of a sense of entitlement. The white path is focused on individualism, competition, exploitation, and it is dehumanizing. Today, Carmen and other people pointed out in the work environment. And, you know, people look for, you know, like the end of Friday, whereas in the red path, what you do is what you love to do, not what you have to do for money. So there's a very different orientation. And I say that because we are descendants of First Nation people here, even though we have white blood in us, but for generations here in Central Texas, I'm talking about us and East Austin in particular. You know, we have always been here. Huahuilteca land, Atzlan, Aztec, Chicano, you know, now we're called Hispanics. But so then, because of this, what I'm saying about the orientation and the relationship with the natural world, with everything, I want to read you nature's heed. Beloved ones, listen to me. I am the sun, the moon, the earth, with its mountains, valleys, and rivers. Stay true to me, and you shall catch a glimpse of eternity. Listen to what I say and heed well these words I say to you now. Hold back in your lifetime those amongst you who would lay waste the meadows, fell the trees, and poison the waters, which are our very veins. Listen, it is on your account, not mine, which I speak. For nature is infinite and shall always be. And when the pavement cracks, it is we who will be back to show the splendor of the universe. And you are a moment in mortality within the infinity of the universe. Listen and heed well these words. Stay true to nature, to yourself. Stay true to me. Resist those amongst you who would endanger and foul the words and blur your glimpse of eternity.
Thank you for that, Daniel.
So I say that because Poder, like El Concilio and like East Austin Town Lake Citizens Group and Martin Luther King, MLK Neighborhood Association, these are some of the longest standing neighborhood associations and organizing entities in Black and Brown Austin. And so, you know, Poder, like many of these folks, is a coalition of families, and we are family oriented. And it was the organizing through that coalition that created Poder and its predecessor, East, which was the East Austin Strategy Team, which was the first time that Black and Brown activists worked together and removed the tank farms, which, you know, East Austin, as has been said, we all know what it is. Some people refer to the reservation, and just like the Lakota Reservation in the Black Hills, the gold in East Austin is the land. And so gentrification has come to it. But it didn't start there. It actually started when, like Susana said, the boat races in the 70s, when, and I just wanted to add to that the boat races, the first year they had the boat races were in West Austin, on Town Lake, west of I-35. And the following year, the powers that be moved it to the east side. And it was in the east side until people could not take it any longer. 3,000 people marched to I-35 and were met with police cannon and dogs and beaten. The Limones, some of the Guerrero families, many of the families that still live here in East Austin were part of that. Now, the one thing that I'll say is that this organization has happened because we had no choice. People had no choice. They actually, civil disobedience, peaceful, nonviolent civil disobedience, protesting. We started organizing, educating our families, educating ourselves, mobilizing people. We had phone trees in those days. And you know, let's see. Yeah, and of course, the tank farms were only moved after Poder engaged in 7 years of data collection, which finally convinced the county commissioners court, not the city of Austin, not the state of Texas, but Bill Elshire and Ken Oden, 2 individuals who actually did something. And that started the dismantling of those tank farms. So there are many other things. Keep Austin beautiful. So as we go forward, this project is part of equity. We've talked about equity. This project is part of economics, like Carmen and Miriam were talking about. You know, equity and justice is not just about who's at the table, but about sharing the wealth. So I personally have pushed this project and other projects that are arts projects in East Austin to ensure that artists of color are not only included, but that they tell the story of their own hometown. When 10-1 started, as soon as 10-1 started, somebody in the city got the idea, let's get artists to tell the story of Austin. And they said, so we want to bring artists from everywhere else to tell the story so that they have like a, you know, some kind of stupid neutral view, you know? And Ora Houston and I pushed back in big meetings with, you know, people, with city people and nonprofits and stuff like that, saying, if the story of East Austin is going to be told in art, in the form of the corridor projects or art in public places, it needs to be artists from here. And not just Latino artists, but Latino artists from here. That's why I pushed for Ruben and for Regina. Because even though Regina is an international artist, she is an Austinite, dude.
Yeah.
And so political activism, organizing, art is very important. And I think it's a big challenge. And where is she? Who's the lady that's the landscape artist? The
Taylor.
consultant.
Hello, I'm here.
Oh, there. Yes, Taylor. Yeah, you. But no, the person that you all hired to do the. She has all that hair. I don't see her now.
That's
Oh,
me,
Stacy.
Danielle. That's Stacy.
Where are you? I don't
I'm
see-
here. I'll come into view. Got to start my video.
Yeah, oh, thank you. Yeah, Stacy and Taylor. You know, also Ruben. It is going to be a challenge to convey this art project as something that is telling the story of not only the history, but the future of what our neighborhoods and our city is going to be. And I did ask the question about if this was going to be a permanent installation or a temporary installation. But regardless, however time it lasts, I think that's going to be a challenge to tell the story. But while the conversation was going on, I had a couple of thoughts that I would like to convey to the artists, and that is, you know, using light, right? You know, illuminating it at night, something of that nature, and maybe even a way, well, color. You know, color. I don't know, in the form of, it would be tough to have things growing in color, but I don't know. Anyway, the thing about the light came to me. So look, so yeah, and like I said, aesthetics is the language of art. And so I would love to be around and would be available to play with y'all.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
And the last thing I will say, and that is, and it pertains to Perry and Linda and other folks who, you know, our mayor recognized Austin as a systemically racist place, and that started the turn away from our racist legacy. And this project, just like what everything that that the M&Ms are doing is turning us away from that. And when you ask about projects, I think that your two projects, the Pillar Project and the East Link, that's the first time that I've ever seen what we're looking for to happen. So that's good. But so things have only changed because we in the community have organized, educated ourselves, mobilized, but that's only half of it. The other half is Black and brown people inside of the bureaucracy. Black and brown people and allied white people who understand racism and systemic racism. And, you know, only by having people in those positions, those gatekeepers in positions of power. I think someone else was talking about boards and commissions, you know. I have challenged in the arts, I have challenged all the white organizations. If you want to participate in equity, then let's change the color of your boards. Let's change the color of your administration. Let's have a rainbow administration in white organizations if they want to participate in undoing racism, because that's what I'm talking about. And racism will end when enough white people want it to end, because Black, brown, Asian, and everybody else has pushed it this far.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'll stop now.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. I really appreciate your perspective, and just want to see if Perry or Linda have more to add or questions to ask each other. Anything you want to get out on the table?
Just going back to how Blacks or Latinas and Latinos don't feel comfortable on the trail. You know, I think it starts with our youth. And if we get the Trail Foundation to somehow do some sort of outreach programming, you know, where that they feel the nature and the beauty and connect with it and know that they're a part of it. And that, you know, myself, when in the 80s, I preferred walking on the east side because I went further west, it was like bikes and buggies and, you know, everyone smashing into each other. Like, do these people know trees or space? I mean, it was just like, I've got my outfit on and I'm here to take charge. And to me, the trail was so much more than that, getting in a certain amount of laps. So, you know, sometimes the barrier to get that youth connected with the trail as soon as possible would be fabulous.
I like that idea.
Good point.
Can I say something about the trails and actually Perry bringing up the fact that we don't see a lot of Black people and East Austin, you know, gentrification has different faces, and I will tell you that the bike lanes and the trails are perceived by us as tools of gentrification. And it wasn't until the Link East project that I started to see maybe that could change.
Wow.
And so we don't see Black and brown people, and we don't, most of the people on the bike lanes are, you know, white guys with $5,000 worth of stuff, right?
Right.
Yeah, and so that's something that we really have to keep in mind. Not this particular project, of course, this project is a static project, but I do have to say that if we're talking about the use of the trails and the bike lanes, the perception has to change, and part of it is because those bike lanes and those trails were put in without Black and brown people at the table.
Mm-hmm. One other thought I had, you know, I hope that with this project, emphasis is given to the further east part of the trails so that people actually have to push themselves down maybe what's not as comfortable, instead of staying up near Zilker or right near downtown. If this art could kind of push people further east, where perhaps that might be something that is uniting with this whole project.
Okay. You all have anything else you want to say? No, you good? Okay, at this point, we have the opportunity to open it up. Everybody have, if you have a question, want to ask anybody in particular, you can turn off your mutes and, open Q&A. Does anybody have any questions, or do the artists have particular questions for any of the advisors or folks that have participated today?
I actually did have a question. And sorry, my video on here. Hey, everybody. My question really kind of came about during Miriam's talk about, and Daniel, you just touched on it too, sort of the ability of this temporary project to have an ongoing impact for social and environmental justice. And really thinking about process, like Stacey had been mentioning, what are some really key points of the process that we as artists should focus on that will offer sort of that long-term support and that can be felt after the project has been over? And if any of you have had experience in this work, and sort of what your thoughts are on that.
Could we lobby to make it a permanent installation, or at least maybe a repeatable one?
Maybe repeatable. Charlotte, what do you have to say?
I like all those ideas, and Daniel, we've heard those too. I think since we don't know exactly what it's going to be yet, I think it's an important question, and maybe even for the artist team to think about what could make this a longer standing thing. If it's in the water, it is going to be subject to rising waters and animals and things like that. But I think it's a really interesting question, and I think we're learning every day. We're learning from every discussion, and we try to pivot as much as possible. So I think it's a great question. Let's talk about that as the artist team.
I think
when totally agree. Oh, sorry, Ruben, you go ahead.
Yeah, I think when we're, in the beginning stages and we're thinking about making it something that can live there long term, thinking about like design wise, since it'll be in the water, having like the part that's submerged in the water, creating like a underground habitat for fish or something, so that it's a dual purpose, serving both underwater and on top of water, creating maybe a floating wetland that birds or other animals can land on and stand on, so we can kind of fight that, hey, it's serving two purposes and it can live here long term, and this is why. So thinking about those things when we're designing, I think could really help, our argument when we're trying to make this a permanent piece.
I just thought of a couple of things to throw out at y'all. One, I talked about light, also mobile. Maybe some of it can be moving. And the lake is where it's gonna be on Town Lake, right? I mean, on Lady Bird Lake. So it doesn't go up and down, is what I'm saying. That's still. But the other thing was, Ruben, you made me think of birds' nests. And an installation where, just like the fish, could have little homes underneath. Maybe the birds could too, and they would be part of the beautiful design.
Love that.
Yeah.
Love that.
I do think that we have a process on our hands as much as a product, and maybe even more so. And I'm looking forward to all talking together about what that process is and how the process has to live and perhaps expand, that it's actually the process that lives on in a more permanent way, because it becomes part of a system, and the product may be more ephemeral. Building in nature, things are always changing. But repeated action seems like a real possibility too. But figuring out how that might be and how it might be somehow like a series of chapters. So it has a sort of, it holds together at the center. This is all very interesting. And I think that those are some questions we're going to be stirring around with when we start meeting.
Chapters, I like that.
All right. Does anybody have any other questions or comments?
I was just curious, like for the art installation, is it gonna like, is it gonna be like over a stretch of distance, like a mile stretch is like different kind of art installations, or is it kind of more focused on like one central area, or is y'all still thinking about that process?
We're with engineers and we've got to get permits, so it's all part of the process. It's all malleable, and
it's got to fit in over there by where the holly used to be. Isn't that where it's going to be?
It's up to the artists.
Yeah.
You know, I think the thing that we need to be cognizant of is that these artists were selected because of who they are, because of what they're bringing to the project, and we really want to learn from them as well. There's going to be, you know, there might be technical difficulties in terms of permitting and things like that, but I think we want to, as a, you know, on the team, we want to sort of sit back and learn from the artists, and also, you know, have shared knowledge, you know, share our knowledge so that they can actually, you know, have a hand up, you know, in terms of how to make this project actually happen, you know. So like Beili said, you know, is like, you know, vision is one thing, but execution and being able to execute the project is another, and that takes layers. And so anyways, and we want to make sure that it's coming from the artists who know the community instead of us. So,
and it's a way of giving ownership to creatives, POC creatives at that as well.
Yep.
I like that.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? We did it.
Yeah, Charlotte, do you want to close us out?
Sure. I mean, wow. That word, just wow. I'm in awe of today, of everything that was said. I've loved it, of all of y'all taking 3 hours out of a Sunday. I mean, it's incredible, meaningful, inspired, honesty, challenge. I mean, all these words are just running through me, but I'm going to stay brief since it's almost 5:30, but just a huge thank you to all of you. I mean, this is such important work, and learning and process and stories. I mean, the word stories came out. We've been hearing that since our first Brain Trust, our first community organization meeting, and how stories need to be told and shared, and the whole story. I mean, I wrote that down, the whole story and the interpretations. I mean, it's just amazing. Thank you all, speakers, attendees, my team. Thank you to PARD and AIPP. We just definitely want to keep these conversations going and discussions, and I love people talking about getting together afterwards. So to give more input to, we have a survey out now that I will throw in the chat.
It's there.
Oh, it's there. Thank you, Casey. Yes, we've got the survey in English and Spanish. And then Casey, if you could just throw the link to the main page. So to wrap all this
done
up with a bow is the idea is to have a big community event when the floating wetlands are ready. And again, we haven't worked through it all because it's a process, but if it's like a full day thing, like the morning, everyone getting together and building it with the artists, and then it is put into place, however that is, and then there's a big party and we can see it, and we've got partners there, and there's music, and we're just all celebrating together. So we're hoping we can do that in May. It's a lot of work, seeing that is March. So just be on the lookout. We'll definitely try to shoot that information out. But thank you again, and thanks for your time. And we're so excited for this. So Everyone have a good evening. I think we asked the artists just to hang on just for a few more minutes. But thank you all.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
I'm so proud of everybody here. I love y'all. Bye.
Thank y'all.